I was standing on the northbound platform, trying not to replay the interview, which was exactly what my brain insisted on doing. Every answer I'd given felt wrong now. Too long, too hesitant. I could still hear my own voice, thin and apologetic, filling the room and then fading as soon as I stopped talking. They'd nodded, polite, professional, already moving on. I'd shaken hands, thanked them for their time, and left knowing before I'd even reached the lift that I wasn't getting a call back. It was the kind of job people didn't get twice. Well paid, the sort of role that came with an unspoken assumption that you belonged there. I'd spent weeks convincing myself I did. I'd practiced answers in the mirror, watched videos about confidence and posture, even bought a suit I couldn't really afford because I'd read that it helped if you dressed like you already had the job. Standing on the platform now, the suit felt like a costume rather than actual clothes. I knew how I looked: narrow shoulders, short and skinny, tie sitting slightly off-center, jacket pulling awkwardly at the seams. I'd always been like this, quiet, easy to overlook, the sort of person people talked over without meaning to, who ended up holding doors open while everyone else passed through. I knew how to make myself smaller without even thinking about it. Rounded shoulders, eyes down, feet tucked out of the way. It wasn't that I didn't have opinions or ambition. I did. I just never seemed able to put them where anyone could see them. Every time I tried to assert myself, it came out wrong, or late, or not at all. I'd tell myself to speak up next time, to stand my ground, and then next time would come and go, and I'd be exactly the same. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other and checked the time again. I knew I should already be thinking about what came next: applications, recruiters, contingency plans, but all I could think was that I'd blown my chance. Not forever, maybe, but for long enough that it felt like it. That was when she stepped into my peripheral vision. At first, it was just a presence, a change in the space beside me. Then I glanced over properly and my brain stalled for a moment, the way it does when something doesn't fit with what you were expecting. She stood close enough that our sleeves almost touched, but she didn't seem aware of me at all. Or if she was, she didn't adjust herself to account for it. She was dressed for work in a way that immediately read as intentional and professional. A fitted dress in a burgundy red colour, heels that gave her a few inches over me, a structured coat draped neatly over one arm. Everything about her suggested she knew exactly where she was going and why. Her hair fell neatly over her shoulders, styled without looking stiff, and her makeup was subtle, but precise, the kind that takes time and money and practice. She was beautiful. I became acutely aware of myself next to her. The way I was leaning forward, shoulders slumped, hands shoved into my pockets like I was trying to disappear into my own jacket. I straightened a fraction, then immediately felt ridiculous for doing so, and let myself slump again. She stood tall, weight balanced easily on her heels, head up. I looked down at my own clothes and felt a familiar flush of embarrassment. The suit wasn't awful, exactly, but it didn't fit the way it should. The trousers were a touch too long, the jacket a little loose through the shoulders. It was the suit of someone who'd bought one suit and hoped it would be enough. Next to her, it might as well have been a school uniform. I shifted my feet, creating a bit more space between us, suddenly hyper-aware of how close we were. She didn't move. She didn't need to. The platform announcement crackled overhead, naming the line, the destination. A ripple of movement passed through the crowd as people edged closer to the platform edge. When the train pulled in, it did so with the usual rush of wind and noise. Doors slid open, and the crowd surged forward. Without thinking, I stepped with it, and immediately bounced back as someone brushed past me, shoulder to shoulder, not even looking. I muttered an automatic apology that no one heard. Ahead of me, people parted almost instinctively to let her through. Not dramatically, not consciously. They just adjusted, shifting bags and bodies to create a clear path. She stepped onto the carriage smoothly, barely breaking stride. I followed a second later and found myself squeezed into a corner near the doors, one hand gripping the pole, the other pressed awkwardly against my side as more people piled in. Someone's backpack dug into my ribs. Someone else's elbow nudged my arm. No one acknowledged it. Across from me, a man stood up as soon as she was fully inside and offered her his seat. She accepted with a brief smile and a quiet thank you, sitting down and crossing her legs with an ease that made it look like the most natural thing in the world. The man hovered for a moment, then found a place to stand, glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking. The train lurched into motion. I steadied myself and tried to focus on anything else. the route map above the doors, the adverts lining the carriage, the scuffed floor. But my eyes kept drifting back to her, and I wasn't the only one. I noticed other men glancing in her direction, quick looks they probably thought were subtle. She didn't react to any of it. She sat upright, hands folded loosely in her lap, gaze unfocused as she looked past the window reflection, and into nothing in particular. There was something self-contained about her, a sense that she was entirely at ease in her own skin. She wasn't performing confidence or demanding attention. She simply occupied the space she was in, and the world seemed to arrange itself accordingly. I felt a twist low in my chest that I didn't have a name for. It wasn't attraction, exactly, though that was part of it. It wasn't resentment. It was quieter than that. A dull, persistent ache that came from recognizing something you want and realizing how far away it feels. I didn't want to be her. That wasn't it. I wanted whatever it was that let her be like that. The certainty, the ease, the way she seemed to belong without having to prove it. The train rattled on, station names flashing past. I stood in my corner, unnoticed, watching her and thinking unhelpfully about how different the interview might have gone if I'd walked into that room carrying even a fraction of what she did, without effort. She stood up 2 stops later. It wasn't abrupt. She waited for the doors to open, gathered her coat, adjusted the strap of her bag. When she stepped into the aisle, the people around her shifted without being asked. She moved through them the same way she'd moved onto the train, easily, without apology. A couple of heads turned. Someone murmured "excuse me," though she hadn't blocked them. Just before she stepped off, she glanced back down the carriage and our eyes met. It lasted no more than a second long enough for me to register the calm in her expression, the faint curiosity, the sense that she was entirely untroubled by being seen. Then, she was gone, heels clicking once on the platform before the doors slid shut again. I watched the empty space she left behind until the train started moving. A small, stupid part of me wished I could bottle whatever it was she carried with her. The carriage settled back into its rhythm. People adjusted their grips, glanced at their phones, went back to being commuters. I stayed where I was, wedged near the doors, and told myself to stop staring at nothing. As the train pulled away, I realized I was standing a little differently. It wasn't dramatic. My shoulders weren't suddenly back, my chest wasn't puffed out. It was more that I wasn't slumping quite as much. My weight felt more evenly balanced on my feet. I noticed it only because I caught myself thinking how much easier it was to stay upright as the train rattled through the tunnel. I took a breath and felt it go deeper than usual. My lungs filled without the familiar tightness in my chest, the shallow catch that came with nerves I pretended I didn't have. I exhaled slowly, then frowned, aware that I'd done it without telling myself to. Someone shifted beside me, creating a fraction more space. Another person adjusted their bag so it wasn't digging into my side anymore. I assumed it was coincidence. The carriage thinned out at this time of day. People were getting off, making room. Still, I found myself with my arms a little freer than before. My fingers tingled. At first I thought it was just pins and needles from gripping the pole too tightly. I flexed them, one by one, watching the feeling ebb and then return, a light fizzing under the skin. When I brushed my thumb against the tips of my fingers, the sensation seemed sharper than it should have been, as if my skin were more sensitive. I shook my hand once and let it drop back to my side. The train swayed and I adjusted automatically, catching my balance without thinking about it. My reflection in the dark window looked steadier than I felt. Something brushed the back of my neck. I reached up, half expecting to find someone's coat or a stray thread from my own jacket, but my fingers met hair instead. My hair. I had been for a haircut earlier that week, but I guessed my usual barber hadn't been quite as thorough as usual. Not that it had helped me in the end. I frowned and smoothed them back, telling myself I was imagining things. No one was looking at me. No one had even noticed me touching my hair. The train slowed briefly between stations, then picked up speed again. I shifted my feet and became aware of my jacket sitting differently on my shoulders. The fabric no longer pulled quite so awkwardly when I moved. I rolled one shoulder, then the other, feeling the material slide more smoothly than it had earlier. I glanced down. At first I couldn't see anything wrong. The suit looked like my suit. Dark, slightly creased, oversized, but when I pinched the sleeve between my fingers it felt softer than I remembered. The lining at the cuff was a shade lighter, cleaner. I rubbed the fabric between my thumb and forefinger, my brow creasing. A warmth spread across my chest. It was subtle at first, like the lingering heat after a hot shower. I shifted uncomfortably, assuming it was nerves again, or the crush of bodies. But the sensation didn't fade. It intensified, a gentle pressure from the inside out. I hesitated, then pressed my palm lightly against my chest. There was a weight there that hadn't been before. I froze, fingers splayed, heart thudding hard enough that I could hear it in my ears. Carefully, as if I might startle myself, I pressed again. The warmth pulsed under my hand. The shape beneath my shirt felt different. Not drastically, just enough that I couldn't immediately explain it away. I dropped my hand and stared down at myself. The front of my jacket no longer hung straight. The line of it curved ever so slightly over my chest. My tie sat differently too, the knot resting between two shapes that hadn't been there this morning. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. I looked back up at the window, at my reflection. The change was faint, almost imperceptible if you didn't know what you were looking for. My hair framed my face a little more than it had. My features looked softer somehow, as if the harsh edges had been smoothed down. But that was impossible. People's faces didn't just change. It was just stress, playing tricks on my brain. I blinked hard and looked away. Panic hit me all at once, sharp and breathless. I pulled my phone from my pocket with shaking fingers and opened the camera, meaning to check my reflection in the dark glass again, but needing something clearer, something I could trust. The front-facing camera flicked on, and for a split second I felt a rush of relief. It was still my face, I think. Then, I watched it change. Not in a jump, not in the way films do it. My features didn't rearrange themselves all at once. It was slower than that, subtle enough that if I'd looked away for a second, I might have missed it. My jaw seemed a touch less angular. The tension around my mouth eased. My eyes looked wider somehow, lashes darker, fuller, as if I'd applied mascara without noticing. Colour bloomed faintly on my lips, then settled into something soft and natural. I lowered the phone slightly, heart hammering, then raised it again. The changes didn't reverse. They continued, quietly, inexorably. A hint of makeup appeared where there hadn't been any before, blending seamlessly into my skin as if it had always been there. My face looked cared for. No, I whispered, though I didn't know who I was talking to. I glanced around the carriage, hoping to catch someone staring at me in shock, to see some confirmation that this was really happening. No one was looking. A man across from me scrolled through his phone. Someone else yawned. The woman nearest the doors adjusted her scarf and stared blankly ahead. The world remained stubbornly uninterested. I looked back at the phone. The person on the screen still resembled me, but the resemblance was slipping. My skin looked smoother, the faint shadow of stubble I'd missed that morning completely gone. My eyebrows were neater, shaped without looking artificial. The effect wasn't cartoonish or exaggerated. It was worse than that. It was believable. My chest tingled again, stronger this time, and I hissed through my teeth as the sensation spread. It wasn't pain, it was pressure. A slow, steady push outward that made my shirt feel suddenly too tight. For a brief second I thought, maybe I was having a heart attack. Would that be preferable? I dropped the phone to my side and pressed my arm against my chest, trying to ignore it. I couldn't. The pressure grew, insistent, accompanied by a deep warmth that made my skin feel oversensitive. I shifted my stance, aware of my body in a way I never had been before. The train lurched, and I adjusted automatically, hips tilting slightly to compensate. Hips. The word landed heavily in my mind. I looked down, and my breath caught. The line of my trousers was wrong. The fabric pulled differently over my thighs, tighter across my hips than it had any right to be. I ran my hands down my sides, fingers brushing curves that hadn't existed minutes ago. They were subtle, but they were there, rounding me out, changing the way my weight settled over my legs. My phone buzzed faintly in my hand, screen still lit. I raised it again, unable to stop myself. My hair was longer, not by inches all at once, but enough that it now fell past my ears, framing my face in soft waves. It moved when the train did, catching the light as it shifted. I lifted a hand and watched as my fingers threaded through it easily, the texture silkier than I remembered. The style looked deliberate, like something I might have paid for. Something cool brushed my collarbone. I glanced down just in time to see a thin chain settle against my skin, a small piece of jewellery resting neatly at the hollow of my throat. I stared at it, then at my ears, where tiny studs glinted under the carriage lights. I hadn't felt them appear. They were just there. My suit jacket shifted again. I felt the fabric tighten and loosen at the same time, seams sliding, material smoothing itself into a new shape. The jacket shortened slightly, tapering in at the waist. The shoulders narrowed, fitting me instead of hanging off me. The shirt beneath it lightened, the stiff cotton softening into something finer, buttons realigning themselves down the front. I stood there, shaking, while my clothes remade themselves around me. At first the changes felt almost neutral. The outfit became sharper, more intentional, something that might have passed for androgynous if you didn't look too closely. A tailored blazer, a crisp white blouse. I might have convinced myself it was just a better version of what I'd been wearing, but it didn't stop. The warmth in my chest intensified, swelling outward until my blouse strained gently over it. I pressed my arms against my sides, horrified, as my chest continued to grow, the weight undeniable now. The fabric of the blouse shifted again, accommodating the change, buttons parting just enough to reveal a glimpse of pale lace beneath. A bra. I stared at it, disbelieving. The cups filled steadily, lifting and shaping my chest until there was no mistaking what I was looking at. My breathing grew shallow as the sensation peaked, my new breast settling into a size that felt heavy and present on my frame. My hips widened further, the change rippling through my lower body. I felt it in my thighs, my backside, the way my center of gravity shifted. The trousers flared slightly over my waist, rearing up my legs as the fabric below smoothed and tightened into a skirt. A short pencil skirt, hugging curves I didn't recognize, and revealing brown tights beneath it as naturally as skin. I let out a broken sound, somewhere between a gasp and a whine. I looked back at my phone. The woman staring back at me was beautiful. The realization hit me harder than the panic. She had my eyes, I thought dimly, and something of my expression, but everything else had been refined, elevated. Her makeup was flawless, enhancing rather than hiding. Her hair fell in glossy waves around her shoulders, a warm, honeyed blonde that caught the light. Her face was perfectly symmetrical, but still me in there, like an alternate universe version of myself. I felt sick, and somewhere beneath that, horribly, I felt something else. People were looking at me now. I noticed it slowly, the way you notice a change in temperature. A glance held a second longer than necessary. A man's eyes flicking away when I met them. Another, openly watching me from across the carriage, interest clear on his face. No one looked alarmed. No one looked confused. They looked intrigued. Heat rushed to my cheeks, a flush of embarrassment burning through the panic. I folded my arms instinctively, then realized what that did to my chest and dropped them again, heart racing. My feet shifted. I felt the familiar sole of my shoes give way beneath me, reshaping into something narrower, higher. Heels. Stiletto heels. I wobbled for half a second, then steadied, my body adjusting without conscious effort. It felt natural, like I'd been balancing like this for years. A handbag appeared on my arm, weight settling comfortably against my hip. Bracelets clinked softly at my wrist. Rings hugged my fingers, fitting perfectly. I stood there, fully transformed from the neck down and nearly there everywhere else, trying to breathe, trying not to scream. The train thundered on through the tunnel, utterly indifferent. I squeezed my eyes shut. When I opened them, nothing had reversed. If anything, everything felt more settled. I stared down at myself as the changes continued, unable to look away. My blouse strained further as my chest kept growing, the buttons pulling apart another fraction until the gap between them was unmistakable. The weight on my chest increased steadily, a deep, insistent heaviness that shifted when I breathed or moved. I could feel the skin stretching, the unfamiliar sensitivity making every small motion register too sharply. When the train jolted, my breasts moved with it, a soft, undeniable reminder that they were real. My hips widened again, slower this time, the sensation spreading through my lower body like something being gently, inexorably prized open. The skirt tightened across my backside, fabric smoothing over curves that hadn't existed earlier that afternoon. I became acutely aware of the way my weight now settled differently when I stood, my center of gravity nudging me into a posture that felt both foreign and instinctive. I pressed my lips together, lips that felt fuller and covered with something cherry-flavored, breathing through my nose, trying to stay quiet, to stay unnoticed. My heart felt like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. "Excuse me." The voice was close, right beside me. I flinched and looked up. The man standing there was a little older than me, maybe late 30s or early 40s, wearing a neatly cut coat and holding onto the pole with one hand. A stray thought flickered through my mind that he was handsome, and it startled me with how sudden and uninvited it felt. He was looking at me with polite concern, not shock, not confusion, just the mild attentiveness of someone offering a small kindness. "Would you like to sit?" he asked. For a second, my mind went completely blank. I stared at him, mouth slightly open, trying to work out how to respond. He didn't seem aware that anything was wrong, that anything extraordinary had happened at all. I nodded. The movement was automatic, my body responding before my thoughts caught up. He stepped aside and gestured to the seat he'd just vacated. I murmured something that might have been "thank you" and lowered myself down. I sat without thinking about it, then immediately became aware of how wrong it felt. The seat seemed to meet me differently, my weight spreading wider than I expected, pressure catching in places that hadn't existed before. I shifted instinctively, a flicker of embarrassment passing through me as I tried to find a position that didn't feel so conspicuous. My back straightened, my knees angled together. I smoothed the skirt down over my thighs with a practiced, unconscious motion. The action felt natural, ingrained, as if I'd done it 1,000 times before. My reflection stared back at me from the window opposite. It took a moment for my brain to process what I was seeing. The woman in the glass was poised, put together, undeniably beautiful. Long, honey blonde hair framed her face in soft waves. Her makeup was flawless without being heavy, her eyes bright, her lips gently coloured. The blazer fitted her perfectly, cinching in at a waist I didn't recognise. Her chest rose and fell beneath the open collar of her blouse, deep cleavage visible beneath her large breasts. Natural. She looked like she belonged there. There was no trace of the timid, hunched man I'd been maybe 20 minutes ago. My stomach twisted. The tingling that had been running through my body for what felt like an eternity began to ease. The constant pressure, the shifting sensations, the relentless awareness of change slowed, then softened, like static fading out. For a fleeting, desperate second, I thought that might be it, that the transformation was finished. Relief flickered through me, thin and fragile, despite my newfound situation. Then a new sensation bloomed low in my body. It started as a focused warmth, centered in my groin, sharp enough that my breath caught. The heat spread slowly, deliberately, sending a jolt of panic through me that was stronger than anything I'd felt so far. No, not that. I squeezed my thighs together instinctively, nylon sliding together, and my heart racing. But it didn't stop the sensation. It intensified, prickling and insistent, as if something deep inside me were being drawn inward. I could feel it happening. From beneath the skirt, from a place I could no longer see, my body began to change in a way that left no room for denial. The weight that had always been there between my legs lessened, then shifted, withdrawing gradually as if it were being gently erased. The sensation was deeply unsettling, intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. And then, horribly, something else tangled itself into it. A strange, alien thrill rippled through the heat, sharp enough to make my toes curl inside my heels. My face burned as I became acutely aware of how exposed I was, how close I was to other people, how my body was reacting without my permission. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek, fighting to keep my breathing steady, fighting to stay silent. The heat climbed higher, flooding my lower belly, my hips, my breasts and nipples. My cheeks felt like they were on fire. I could feel eyes on me again, or maybe I just imagined them, but the thought only made everything worse. The sensation built, tightening and tightening, my cock being pulled deeper and deeper until it felt like I was balanced on the edge of something I would never come back from. Then it peaked. The change completed itself with a sudden, breath-stealing snap of sensation that tore a small, involuntary sound from my throat before I could stop it. I clapped a hand over my mouth, eyes wide, heart hammering, but no one reacted. No one even glanced in my direction. And then it was over. The heat ebbed away, leaving behind a deep, unfamiliar stillness. I sat there, frozen, afraid to move, afraid of what I might feel if I did. Slowly, cautiously, I shifted my weight. The absence was total. There was nothing left of the man I had been. My body settled into its new shape with quiet finality. The last lingering tingles faded, replaced by a sense of solidity, of completeness that made my chest ache. Everything felt finished, as if my body had reached a conclusion it had been working toward all along. I stared at my reflection again, at the woman sitting with her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes wide, but steady. She was me. The train began to slow. The familiar announcement crackled overhead, naming the next station. My station. A spike of panic shot through me. What was I supposed to do? Go to the hospital and try to explain that I'd spontaneously changed sex on the tube? Walk into a police station and tell them my body wasn't mine? I imagined the looks I'd get, the questions I wouldn't be able to answer. Should I head to a psychologist? Or a medium? Or did I just go home? The doors slid open. People stood, moved past me, filtered out onto the platform. I stood up with them, my body moving smoothly, heels clicking softly against the floor. I navigated the crowd without thinking, slipping through gaps, adjusting my pace instinctively. I stepped onto the platform, and the cool air hit my face. For a moment, I just stood there. What the hell had just happened? And what was I supposed to do now?